Hi, I'm Connor Hagness, and I studied the filibuster, the rapid rise over the last decade, and the need to reform this political turmoil. So my essential question for this was, why is the filibuster, a fundamental aspect of the Senate rules, destroyed the legislation process in the Senate, and how can a simple tweak enable advancements in legislation in the filibuster to coexist? So first, I'm going to talk about the rapid increase in the last decade, but to start, I thought I would define a filibuster because I feel like maybe not everyone might know what it is. So a filibuster is when one or more members of Congress debate over a proposed piece of legislation in an attempt to delay or entirely prevent a decision being made on the proposal. A filibuster can be overcome by achieving 60 cloture votes, needing a supermajority of 60 members or more of Congress in agreement. Cloture votes force this supermajority, and normal legislation solely requires a simple majority. And then this graph here is from 1917 to 2018 and studies the number of cloture motions filed over that time. And from 1917, when the cloture rule was put in place, to 1970, there were fewer than 60 cloture motions used, and the most notable of this time was the filibuster blocking civil rights legislation. Between 1970 and 2000, cloture votes increased to about 17 cloture motions per year. Yet in the 2000s, minority parties and the senators began to routinely filibuster impactful legislation, and during this period from 2000 to 2018, an average of 53 cloture votes were held every year, with a continuing trend upward. And cloture votes peaked at a high of 218 for the 2-year period under the 113th Congress. The data was studied up until the 115th Congress, where there were 168 cloture votes that year. It's important to note that the data above shown in the graph represents the number of cloture motions actually filed. If Senate leaders know or sense that 41 senators plan to oppose a proposed legislation, they often don't even bring the matter to light, which in turn refutes even more legislation. An R Street Institute, a think tank located in Washington, D.C., describes the 115th Congress as more dysfunctional than ever. Only 52 pieces of legislation were passed during that time, largely to do with the use of the filibuster. And the filibuster overall has changed the Senate, and often when proposing legislation, they ask for unanimous consent of the whole Senate, and if they cannot receive that, then they ask for 60, not 51, because they know that it will get filibustered. So next, I wanted to talk about Obama and the filibuster. And prior to his appointment as president, Obama served as a Democratic member of the United States Senate for the state of Illinois from 2004 to 2008. During his time in the Senate, Obama voted 24 times to filibuster bills he opposed. He voted to filibuster the National Defense Authorization Act in 2005, the Securing America's Borders Act in 2006, and the FISA Amendments Act in 2008. He also voted on bills that repealed the federal estate tax, to ease the regulation of leases for oil and gas exploration on federal lands, and to prohibit taking a minor across state lines to get an abortion. And he didn't just use the filibuster as a member of the Senate. He was an advocate for it, defending it. When Republicans in the majority in 2005 considered terminating the filibuster, he said we should keep it not as a partisan political weapon, but as a vital part of our legislation process. And he encouraged his Senate colleagues to rise above the ends justify the means mentality that might lead to institutional changes with long-term implications just to gain some short-term political victories. When talking to his colleagues, Obama said, "Every senator knows that if the majority chooses to end the filibuster, the fighting, the bitterness, and the gridlock will only get worse. One party, be it Republican or Democrat, should not be able to change the rules in the middle of the game so they can make all the decisions while the other party is told to sit down and keep quiet." Yet in recent light, it seems Obama, no longer the focal point of the country, has a change of heart. He's quoted at the funeral of civil rights activist John Lewis saying, "If all that this takes is eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do." And he's not wrong in saying this. Obama is right. The filibuster does need reform. Yet the key point he brought up earlier when he was in the Senate is that it would be foolish to simply eliminate the filibuster, as it has become a fundamental part of the legislation process, and eliminating it would only cause more gridlock. Rather, there needs to be a compromise between both parties, as control of the Senate and presidency is constantly changing, and truly, as Obama said, one party cannot simply eliminate the filibuster without causing a riot between members of the Senate. So what's next? A new direction, lowering cloture votes. So this graph here is from Benjamin Edelson. He's a professor from Harvard that I connected with, and the points I make will go along with this data. So eliminating the filibuster is nearly impossible. It requires 2/3 of the Senate to agree, even more than the 60 that it requires to achieve cloture. Yet there are some other ways to potentially reform it. The way I thought was lowering the number of cloture votes would enable more actions of thwarting the filibuster possible. So say the number was 55 rather than 60. Well, that's 5 less senators needed to pass the proposed bill, lowering the threshold that needs to be crossed to obtain those cloture votes. And the constant desire for control of the Senate for both parties is undeniable, and the filibuster often enables the minority to overcome the majority, going against basic Constitution ideals. And the Senate, as great as it is, when talking about the filibuster, does not always do a great job in representing Americans effectively. And so an example of this would be, so each state gets 2 senators, as you know, and it does not matter the population. So for example, the state of California hosts a population of 39 million, while the state of Wyoming hosts a population of 580,000, yet they get the same amount of representation in the Senate. And so California, they often vote democratically and are traditionally a blue state, and Wyoming is traditionally a red state. And so these 2 states cancel each other out in the Senate when it comes down to a vote. So when the filibuster requires 60 votes to overcome, it becomes extremely hard to pass this legislation, and normally empowers the minority over the majority. So in the graph here, you can see on the right-hand side, it says shared population represented, supporters of cloture, opponents of cloture. So this represents the population of the US, and this is just like a snippet of his data, but it shows. So 58 votes for yes, that they support the vote, but it actually is 68% of America, what it's representing based on the senators. So I thought lowering the vote to 55, that allows for this 4 out of the 6 to be passed. And the representation, 65%, 65%, 65%, 66%, those are all able to pass through. So yeah, that's what I had for my presentation. Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, are there any, I'm sure there are there any arguments in favor of the keeping with two senators sense. I know it's in the self-interest of small states to have the 2 senators because of that.
And then the House.
Are there other arguments, other people who are in favor, who don't have that interest, but are still in favor of the current system of the 2?
Not specifically off the top of my head, but I also just think that because the filibuster is used like in the Senate the majority of the time, that it allows the minority to have more of a voice than the majority, because the Senate, like the way that our government works is it says is like essentially since each state gets 2 senators, and obviously every state doesn't have the same population, so the House of Representatives like is like filling that gap, but it doesn't fill that gap in the Senate. So I feel like for the filibuster, like specifically, like no larger state is going to be like in favor of that. I think it's just the small states. Mr. Mann?
Could you describe a bit more of the origins of the filibuster and how it might be used differently today than how it was
Yeah,
created?
so the filibuster, it's actually not in the Constitution. It was founded in Senate Rule 22, I think around 125 years after the Constitution was drafted. So it wasn't like the framers' intention to have a filibuster, and I think if the framers were to see like how the filibuster were being used, they would completely disagree with it and say like it goes against like basic Constitution ideals. But yeah, it was drafted in Senate Rule 22.
Have you considered, there was an example of a filibuster occurring at the state level in Texas recently, where you saw the elected official literally actually filibustering, standing up and reading and not being able to touch. Did you look into very much alternatives that reformed the ease at which one can filibuster?
Yeah, and I don't think that that's actually still necessary. I think that it was already established that there no longer needs to be the physical element of actually filibustering. I think
At the federal level, yeah.
yeah, but is that not at the state level? I didn't look at a state level.
It was just an example of how it appeared to be harder to do so in state under law in Texas. Did you consider reform alternatives that would make it harder at the federal level?
No, as I was gathering, I was looking more at a federal level, and I was saying that like I already understood that there no longer needed to be the physical element, so that allowed legislation to be produced more efficiently. But no, I'll definitely have to take a look at that. Thank you.
I just wondered.
Can you say a little bit more about why the founding generation would have been unhappy with the filibuster?
Yeah, I think that the Senate normally runs from a simple majority and without the filibuster, so that would be 51 votes. And now the 60 votes, I think they would even be unhappy with. But when they see the breakdown of some of the votes, like the graph shows here, that's like completely the opposite of what they want. That's the minority just completely taking over the majority. So I think that as it is now, they would look at it and say it's terrible, but I feel like if they were to look at mine, they would have some different ideas.